everyone, hope you're all doing well this week. Just wanted to go over some of our quiz questions and last week and this week to come. So last week we talked a little bit more about some ethical issues in the clinical setting, mainly death and dying, patient-assisted suicide, consent, informed consent, those types of things. So it seems that perhaps those are areas that a lot of you are interested in, just judging from your items that you've chosen for your final project. So hopefully you found that to be interesting. And I've gotten through the grading, all but the what did we have last week? A case study or a paper case study. So I haven't gotten through those yet, but I've gotten through everything else. So look for those in the week to come, the grades for those week 5 papers. So believe it or not, we're in week 6. I can't, I've said this every week, but the term is flying by. So this week we're going to take a look, obviously still in the healthcare realm, but more about societal or population health type issues and the ethics related. So we're going to, obviously we can't talk about population health currently without talking about COVID. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well as some other areas, health disparities overall, just issues faced generally across the population or across society. When you think about ethical, ethical dilemmas, you may think, well, gosh, I plan to work in a hospital, so I'm not going to have to deal with the, the issues of disparities, in certain populations or across certain areas. But you actually will, if you think about, and I think we've talked about it in this class, but certainly in prior classes, think about an organization like UPMC or Allegheny Health Network. They as a nonprofit organization have an obligation to the community to assist with regard to those things. So they can't just serve their patients. They also need to serve their community to maintain their not-for-profit status. So that's why it is important for all of us, even if we're not working in public health, to care about our communities, not just from a moral and ethical standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, because most of us will work for nonprofits, as most healthcare organizations are nonprofit, and we need to make sure we're serving our community adequately and meeting those criteria to maintain our not-for-profit status. From a moral and ethical standpoint, I think most of us would agree that it's the right thing to do, and you should always do what is the right thing. But so we'll talk about that this week, inequity and inequalities in healthcare, but then also that disaster, emergency preparedness, pandemic preparedness stuff. So interesting topics this week. We do have a reflection assignment. I believe that I had switched over last week. I joked, I said that we hadn't paid the bill for Turnitin, and that is potentially why it didn't work. But I did reach out to IT with regard to Turnitin. Anytime you see a drop box that looks like this here with a little red and blue box, that is a Turnitin assignment. Obviously, you guys know that, I'm sure by now. And last week it just flat out was gone from the system. It said it couldn't find it. So I just checked. It appears to be working right now. If it was an issue of somebody forgot to pay the bill or whatever, that appears to be taken care of. But if you do notice that there's an issue with your assignment this week submission, please let me know, and we'll just transition this assignment over to a regular Blackboard assignment as well. But I like to use that when I can. Sadly, we've had, I can't say I've had that issue with anyone in this class, but we have certainly had issues with plagiarism in the past, and that's a great way for us to to deal with that and to make sure that everyone's staying on the up and up, especially in a class about ethics. It's important for us to be making sure that all of us are behaving in an ethical manner. So if you do have an issue with that, please just reach out to me, give me a call, drop me an email, send me a text, whatever, and I will just transition that over like I did for last week. So let's take a look at our quiz questions from last week. So first question, if assistance in suicide becomes more socially acceptable, our correct answer was A, health service organizations will have to address the ethical issues it raises. And I don't, that's kind of an obvious answer. I think that some folks answered C, and I'll talk about that in a second, but will anytime that there is something that is provided from the healthcare perspective, a treatment, whatever it might be, the organization needs to address it from an ethical perspective and to make sure that that particular service or item fits within their within what is appropriate in their mission and vision, etc. So I know I've raised this as an example before, but it's a good one when you think about faith-based organizations, especially Catholic organizations, and not even just Catholic organizations, other Christian organizations that say are against abortion, against the use of birth control, those types of things. They may not offer those services within their healthcare organization. There's no requirement that says you have to offer everything that's available. Obviously, we address it from an economic perspective all the time, where one organization will have an MRI machine and another one will not. And it's not that that other organization is trying to deprive folks of care. They just don't have the cash on hand to buy an MRI, or maybe the need is being met within the community elsewhere. So that happens regularly. When it's based in morals and ethics, it gets a little more hairy, especially when so many faith-based organizations are the main caregivers in town. I came from a town in New York where we had two large systems, or two, for that area large, but they're actually not very large, but two healthcare systems. One was faith-based, one was not. I worked for one, my husband worked for the other, and it was interesting, the differences in the types of care that they provided, and actually in their approach to care overall was very different as well. So there are positives and negatives for patients in those situations, but any healthcare organization needs to address the ethical issues that any service raises. We're seeing that now with medical marijuana as well, as many states have approved the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. There are many physicians that are very hands-off and want nothing to do with it. And it's probably an ethical dilemma for many of them. Maybe they don't approve of the use of marijuana as a as a medicinal agent, or they don't believe in the science behind it, or whatever it might be, but it does raise an issue for them, and therefore they're not interested in being involved in that. And that's why you'll see, especially here in Florida, like every corner, there's a weeddoctor.com or something like that to provide people with, because here in Florida we only have access to medicinal marijuana, not recreationally. So people are accessing it via those types of physicians who focus solely on the prescription of medicinal marijuana. In some states, you do have to see a specific type of physician that is licensed or certified in the use of marijuana from a medicinal perspective. But that's not the case in all states. But we are seeing that kind of that specialization occur. My fear is that it's going to create a huge amount of fraud and abuse in the system. But that's an entirely separate issue. But so from an ethical perspective, organizations do need to address ethical issues that treatments or services raise. B. So some folks chose answer C as the proper answer, which would be A and B. But I don't think that there's a need for health service organizations to address end-of-life care in their mission specifically. Your mission is usually about who you are as an organization currently, and end-of-life care would just be one part of that. Just like if you provide great cancer care, but you're an acute care hospital, your mission's not going to talk about cancer care, just because that's just one piece of all of the elements that you provide. So I don't think addressing it in the mission statement is a requirement. If that's the only service you are providing, like for example, the physicians that focus solely on prescription of medical marijuana, they probably would want to talk about that in their mission statement, because that's what they do. That's the only thing that they do. But generally, health service organizations won't be addressing end-of-life care in their mission statements, they may be looking at addressing end-of-life care secondary to strategic planning or something like that, to make sure that they're in a good place, and understanding how that would be used within their organization and how that would fit. So hopefully that makes sense. This question, I actually gave back some answers here. So the question was, in one state that legalized physician-assisted suicide, it was initially feared that. So the correct answer is that the law would be used by people who are poor and uneducated. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But some people also chose A, and that isn't entirely accurate, but in reading the chapter, I can understand why you may have chosen that. So if you chose A, I gave you credit for A, or if you chose the correct answer, which was C, I gave you credit for that. So there was some, interestingly, Supreme Court decisions, past Supreme Court decisions, actually had, specifically Roe v. Wade, was being used to kind of push forward the agenda of physician-assisted suicide, because Roe v. Wade, which is obviously currently being challenged kind of across the country in various areas, especially in the South, but it really gave women autonomy, which we are allotted anyway, but for whatever reason, it really did provide, from a Supreme Court perspective, autonomy for decision making for women, specifically with regard to abortion, and that's what Roe v. Wade is about, amongst other things. But and so many of those that were in favor of physician-assisted suicide and moving forward with legalization of that were leaning on Roe v. Wade, because it's the same type of autonomy, letting people make the decision based on their condition and in discussion with their physicians for euthanasia. However, there were also some on the other side that felt the Supreme Court would rule against it and overrule their decisions. So although that answer isn't 100% correct, I did give credit there. The answer regarding people who are poor and uneducated, that was a fear that specifically related to the cost of healthcare. So let's say somebody who does not have insurance becomes quite ill, is dealing with a cancer diagnosis or heart disease diagnosis, or something that is very treatable but maybe is expensive. Or, many people hear the word cancer and assume the worst, whereas now there are many cancers that are very survivable with treatment. So there was a fear at the time when, initially when these types of treatments were being approved, that it would be used by folks that did not have education or that did not have money to understand. They didn't have education to understand their prognosis, or they didn't have money to pay for treatments, and so they would use this as an out. And obviously that is, from an ethical perspective, that's certainly not the reason that we would allow for physician-assisted suicide. So that's why that is correct, but I can see why folks chose A as well, so I did give credit for A also. Last question. One form of surrogate decision-making is A, and our answer is B, power of attorney. So a power of attorney, durable power of attorney, it depends. It's a state-defined term, but it's really about giving that power to someone else to make decisions on your behalf. So that's surrogate decision making. Someone is making decisions on your behalf. Some people chose A, some people chose E as the correct answers, and living will isn't correct. It's a decision making tool, but with a living will, you are making your decisions. You are just giving the power to someone else to carry them out. So you are making the decision with regard to end-of-life care in your living will or your healthcare proxy advance directive forms. You are making your decision. So it's not surrogate decision making. You're just having a surrogate that carries that out for you, your healthcare proxy. So that's why it's not surrogate decision making. I guess it's surrogate action. But a power of attorney is legitimately surrogate decision making. Someone else is making decisions on your behalf. Could be a family member, could be literally an attorney, it could be someone from the state, etc. So that's that one. So we're almost out of time. So that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions or if you have issues with Turnitin, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I will see you in the classroom. Thanks.